Joey Gallo comes over to the table, and he says, Huntz, I'm a big fan of yours, and he says, my father says, fuck you. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm dead.
American Timelines is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network. Find out more at queencitypodcastnetwork.com.
So now I'm obsessed with time. Come on, tell me about the time. Had it all in my hand tonight. Had the time of my life. When the words all come down like blues on Tuesdays come down. Throw it all away. Throw it all away.
Welcome to another episode of American Timelines by History for Jerks. I'm Joe, and I have a very special interview I want to share with you. This week, I am joined by my uncle, the very Reverend Gary Hall, who is the son of Huntz Hall, legendary actor, comedian from the Dead End Kids and the Bowery Boys from the 30s and 40s. I thought, what better time to talk to him about his dad, his famous father, Huntz Hall, than when we're covering the 40s on American Timelines. It popped up on my feed because in 1943, Huntz Hall was served in World War II briefly, which my uncle talks about, and how he got kicked out, which is funny. And he also made a training video for the Air Force in 1943 called Don't Kill Your Friends, which is available on YouTube. It's about 10 minutes. It's a pretty funny and interesting training video because it's an actual training video. It's really surreal to watch a 1940s video explaining to pilots how bombing works and how the airplane best practices for bombing countries and things. Don't kill your friends. It's really funny and interesting. So check that out. We talk about that, and then we get into some funny stories my uncle has just about Huntz and, things in the 40s and things he did. He also got busted for marijuana in the late 40s, so I figured this is just a great time to talk about it. I really am trying to figure out a way to talk to my uncle about his dad more, maybe a weekly or probably a monthly conversation, just checking in about things Huntz did and movies he made, because there's so much interesting stuff, and I get to see my uncle once a year at a lake at my family reunion every year, and he always just drops gems as far as stories go. So this one's no different. Please enjoy this special interview with Gary Hall, son of Huntz Hall. Thanks for listening. I'm joined now by my uncle, the very Reverend Gary Hall, and only child of the great Huntz Hall. Welcome, Uncle Gary, and Aunt Kath, too.
Hi.
Great nephew Joe, it's great to speak to you.
Great nephew.
I'm a very nephewy Joe. Yeah. So thanks for doing this. I know. So the listeners can know that I came up with this idea just by BSing at the lake. Every summer, I always get these great stories from Uncle Gary about Huntz, and I was lucky enough to meet the great Huntz Hall when I was a kid. I was probably 12. And I remember at the time, all I cared about was that he was on Different Strokes. That one episode, all I asked about was Gary Coleman. And now in hindsight, I realized, boy, what a dumb thing that was to focus on. But I was a kid, and who knows? And that's all I cared about.
And
then
I hated that too, because that was one of the last things he did, and he didn't like the fact that they always had him play, like homeless guys.
Yeah.
Like at the end of his career, he was like Bagman. It's like, I don't want to.
Yeah, why do they always have to be a bum? Yeah, that's yeah. So I did. Yeah, I recently actually watched that episode again. Well, just the Huntz parts. I was just like, and it was great. Now he really commands the screen, even then, even towards the end. But so I thought this would be a perfect transition because I was just looking up things that happened. The way I research for the American Timelines podcast is I just kind of go through Wikipedia, and they have events organized in chronological order by year and by month. And I kind of go through and try to pick and choose things that are interesting that I want to learn more about and talk about. And I came across the fact that Huntz Hall was served in World War II and was featured in a training video called "Don't Kill Your Friends." And so that's where I kind of want to start. I was like, oh my gosh, I can actually talk to my Uncle Gary about this and tell me about this. So I watched the whole video. It's pretty funny. Obviously he's great in it, but it's so crazy that this was a real training video, right? Like, it wasn't a joke, really. I mean, it was kind of a joke, but
Yeah, I haven't seen it in a while. But it's like he's the guy that does everything wrong. And this is like what you're not supposed to do as a soldier.
yeah. And he's
Is
called
that what
Dilbert, and they say, don't be a Dilbert.
That's right.
And turns out that's actually where I guess the comic strip guy got
oh wow,
the name Dilbert from that, actually. So actually, I think you probably should have some more royalties coming your way from that.
Now I have to begin my answer to this question by telling you that my father rarely told the truth to news organizations. Gabe Dell, who is another dead end kid, was his lifelong best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And they both just lied terribly to everybody. And so, like, when Gabe was on his play on Broadway, in the playbill, I opened it up and said, Gabe Dell was born to a family of acrobats in Barbados, which was not at all true. Gabe grew up in New York. His father was a doctor.
Yeah.
So my dad was in the Army World War II, but very briefly.
Okay.
They cashiered him out because my father was very high strung,
mm-hmm.
and apparently one of the things that got him kicked out was they were having like a rally or whatever you have in the Army. They were having a rally, and they were singing the Army Air Corps song, nothing can hurt me, up we go into the wild blue yonder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nothing can stop the Army Air Corps. My father stood up and sang, except the weather. And so he was only in the Army for about 6 months.
Okay.
But then, like other actors, like Ronald Reagan, who was never in the Army either, my father always said he fought the Battle of Culver City. Ronald Reagan, my dad made a lot of movies. The movies he was in, they kept making during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in that training film, and he was in another movie, which I was telling you about him beforehand, called Private Buckaroo.
Okay.
Where it's a kind of musical showcase for Harry James and the Andrews Sisters and all these people. But when Harry James goes to the barracks to sign in, my father tries to teach him how to play the bugle. It's a very funny, very funny scene. So you can find that movie. I've seen that movie. I've seen that clip a lot on YouTube. So you should
1942.
1942, right after the war started.
Yeah, and just looking that one up, so Shemp Howard was in that also.
Right. And see, so for your listeners, my father was one of the dead end kids
mm-hmm.
who were 6 teenage actors, radio and stage actors from New York, who were in the play Dead End, which was a social realist play about poor kids in the east side of New York.
Mm-hmm.
And the play was a gigantic success in Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
Then they made a movie of it, and they brought them to Hollywood to be in the movie Dead End. And then Warner's signed them for a contract as the Dead End Kids. And they were in several major features, Angel with 30 Faces with James Cagney,
mm-hmm.
Pat O'Brien. They Made Me a Criminal with John Garfield and Claude Rains, and Hell's Kitchen with Ronald Reagan. Hell's Kitchen with Humphrey Bogart.
Humphrey Bogart, yeah.
And then I forget the one with Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, there was one, I think, with Ronald Reagan, too. Yeah.
But so anyway,
that's amazing.
They went to my dad. The group split after the Dead End Kids ended at Warner Brothers. some of them went and formed a group called the Dead End Kids / Little Tough Guys.
Right.
The other group went to Universal, went to Monogram rather, and became the East Side Kids, and that was my father and Leo Gorsi.
Okay, so it's just the two of them became the East Side Kids,
Well,
or
a
was that
couple of
another
others
group?
like Sammy Sunshine Morrison, who was a black kid who had
Mhm.
been in the movies, was in there. And some of the other kids just went back and forth. Billy Howell, Bobby Jordan,
Mhm.
Gabe Bell, they all, but it was basically, then finally they all became the East Side Kids. But
Okay.
during that time, they made all these movies, but my father was under contract to Universal, and that's where he met Shemp Howard, who really became his kind of lifelong uh, friend and mentor.
Oh, wow.
Shemp was a very funny, on his own. He did a lot of movies on his own
Yeah.
before he came back to the Three Stooges after Curly died. And Shemp, if you ever see a movie called The Bank Dick with W.C. Fields,
Oh,
Shemp Howard is the bartender in that movie. And Fields did not work well with others who were funny as he was.
okay.
And he cut like most of Shemp's scenes out of the movie because they went to a screening and they got such big laughs
Yeah.
that Fields then cut those scenes out of the movie. So
Oh,
anyway,
gosh.
that's sort of what happened. And then the war was going on, so there was a lot of these training films, a lot of USO tours,
Mhm.
a lot of wartime stuff. My dad enjoyed. He was in his early 20s when the war started, and it was a good time for him.
So when you say like USO tours and things, did they take these, like when these films came out, would Huntz and the gang kind of go overseas with them where they were stationed and things, and or even domestically?
I think they were more in the United States. I think
Mhm.
he went to army bases. They didn't take the film so much as they took, it's like the Bob Hope things when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Bob Hope did these things. He went to Vietnam and he'd bring, Raquel Welch or something.
Yeah.
Usually in my dad's days, it was somebody like the Andrews sisters.
Hmm.
And my father and Gabe from the Dead End Kids.
And they would just do like some slapstick type of stuff
Yeah,
and joke around.
and then they developed a nightclub act. But
That's right.
Yeah, they did a lot of personal appearances too. In fact, my mother grew up in Chicago, and my mother first time she ever saw my father was when the Dead End Kids made a personal appearance in Chicago, and she and her mother walked out because they thought they were disgusting and not funny. And of course,
I love it.
6 years later, she was married to the guy.
Oh yeah, and
But,
that was the other thing I forgot to in our pre-call. I forgot to mention that at some point we got to talk about the famous double divorce.
oh yeah,
Was that in the 40s or was that later in the 50s?
that was in the early 50s.
Early 50s. So
So we can come back to that.
we might have to come back to that. And that might have to be a whole nother podcast. Like, I think there's so much info that you have that I've only kind of gotten the surface of, that if you're open to doing this like once a month, I would just love to sit down and pick your brain about all this
Sure.
stuff. And I mean, it's great content. It's great information. And so that I read that whole article that you had sent me about that. So that's a whole fascinating thing, because that happened because you were a young child at that point, right? You were three years old. You were three. So you say you were born in the late 40s, so 49.
I was born in 49. My parents were married in late 48.
Okay.
And I was born in September of 49.
And so your mom was a showgirl.
My mom was there's a man named Earl Carroll who was very famous in the 30s and 40s. He had a theater here, the Earl Carroll Theater, which then became the Moulin Rouge big nightclub. And my mother was a showgirl. My mother had grown up in Chicago. She'd been a model.
Okay.
She was first runner-up for Miss Chicago 1946.
Wow.
And she lost to Cloris Leachman. And then years later, my mother, well, my mother then became a TV costume person, and she did the clothes for the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and so she worked with Cloris Leachman for 7 years.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So she got her back by putting her clothes on too tight.
Although she did pretty well by her, but and then my mother moved out here, and
out here's L.A. You're talking to us from L.A. Yep.
My mother was almost married Donald Duncan, who patented the yo-yo. And we still have somewhere a silver
I
yo-yo,
have it right here.
a silver yo-yo that he gave her,
Really?
a sterling silver yo-yo. And they drove out here to California together, and they had a beef, and they broke up. And so my mom took a bus into Los Angeles from Palm Springs and got a job as a showgirl at the.
Here's the yo-yo.
Here's the
It's one of the original yo-yos.
Well, no, I think it's more of
This
a
is sterling
to my
silver.
friends, to my. So,
That was
That's probably worth $500,000 right there. You're holding.
so I could
Yeah,
be,
no
I
doubt.
could have been the yo-yo heir, And,
I always thought you were kind of a yo-yo heir. No, that's great. So that's the thing. That's the other thing is like.
So anyway, so my parents, yes, my parents were. So my dad had been married in the 40s once, and he got divorced, and then he met my mother, I think, at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel,
Okay.
and they started dating, and then they got married, and she was living with him when he had the marijuana bust.
Okay. Yeah. So the marijuana bust was in 1948, I believe, right?
Right.
And so we talk about the training video and him serving just briefly, and that explains a lot. That it's kind of like Wikipedia has got nothing. It's just like citation needed. He was in so technically, I mean, he served in World War II. That makes him a World War II vet, even if it was
He did
short-lived. Yeah, but he didn't. Did he ever go overseas at all? Do you know? Or
No.
Okay, no. Okay,
He didn't go overseas until they made Valentino in 1976 or whatever it was.
Gotcha. That's the first time.
But yeah, that's the first time he went abroad.
But Huntz was born to back up a little more background, when he was born in Brooklyn or Manhattan?
No, Manhattan.
Manhattan.
Yes, I'm glad he didn't hear you say that.
Yeah, he'd slap
He never
me.
rooted for the Dodgers because they were from Brooklyn.
Because they were from Brooklyn, so he hated the Giants. Yeah, okay, the Giants. That's right.
He was from Manhattan. He grew up at 30th Street, 29th Street, and First Avenue, which is where the UN is now.
Okay, the 29th version. So I love every time I go to New York, I try to find little bits of history that I can go look at. This used to be this. A big one was the Beastie Boys I'm a huge fan of the Beastie Boys. I know all their music, all their things. They're from one's from Brooklyn, one's from Manhattan, and actually I think two might be from Brooklyn. So actually, I don't know if you listened to the podcast I sent you, but they were on Conan O'Brien recently. Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. I don't think I sent it to you. I just texted you. I think you and Kat.
Yeah, I didn't hear that one.
Oh, so the Beastie Boys were on there, and Conan O'Brien is like my hero, comedy hero too. And so Conan, in the middle of the interview, just says, "You guys always have reminded me of the Dead End Kids, the Bowery Boys. You remember the Dead End Kids?" And they looked at the Beastie Boys like they were going to say no. They're like, "Oh yeah, we love those guys. They were our idols growing up. We love those movies." And they said specifically, "Ad Rock, you remind me of," and they all drew a blank. And they're like, "The funny one. Who was the funny one? Who's the funny one in the Dead End Kids?" And I'm like driving my car, listening to this podcast, yelling out, "It's Huntz Hall! It's Huntz! It's Huntz Hall!" And they're like, we're gonna go to break, and we're gonna look it up when we come back. I'm like, God dang it! I'm like fast forwarding, and they got back, and they did remember it, and Conan O'Brien quoted on the podcast. He said, "He is a comedy legend and a comedy genius, Huntz Hall." And so I was like, yeah, that's great. I mean, it's good that people are still remembering it. So that kind of made me think about this whole thing, and then how, like, the Beastie Boys came out with this book about where they started and everything, and they had an apartment on this end side of town. They had an album cover at Ludlow and Rivington. We took a picture, and that's an album cover. So now it's called Beastie Boys Square, and they have a big banner, whatever. So same thing with like, every time you tell me a coordinate where Huntz grew up or was born, and that blows my mind, that especially now that New York has completely changed and everything forever. But watching those old movies is fascinating to me too, seeing those guys run around, although now I realize they were probably done on a soundstage, right? In LA.
Right.
They were made in LA.
The movies were all made in Hollywood, yeah.
So, but back up to when he was in the stage play, Dead End, before, I've never heard of this happening ever again, where they take kids who were in a play and then just, okay, let's put them in movies now. It doesn't really translate as much anymore. So how did he get into theater? Like, was he just, did they just grab these local kids that were funny, or
No, I had my grandmother, my father's mother, was a kind of stage mother. My
okay?
dad was one of 16 kids,
Oh gosh,
and Roman
right.
Catholic, as you can imagine. And
Yeah.
uh, he grew up actually. Milton Berle was a little bit older than my father, and he used to babysit for my dad because Milton's mother and my grandmother were both making the rounds of the agencies. Milton was a child actor also before he
Okay.
was a famous comic, and uh, my dad and his younger brother Mickey,
Hmm.
were in a group called the Madison Square Boys Club, which had a radio show where they sang,
Okay.
they did sketches and things. So my father was a radio actor,
Okay.
and
Like from like how young? Are we talking like 5 or 6
oh
or?
no, like 10, I'd
Okay.
say
Hmm.
8, 9, 10. And in 1935, they were doing the auditions for Dead End, play by Sidney Kingsley. He'd written a play before that called Men in White, which was about doctors, a very famous Pulitzer Prize winning play. Dead End was a big social realism play, and they had an audition, and my father wasn't trying out. His brother Mickey was trying out,
Okay.
and Mickey didn't do well. And they were about to leave, and this character Dippy had to do the sound of a machine gun.
Oh right, yeah.
And so Martin Gable, the actor who was involved in the audition, turned to yelled out to the audience, to the theater audiences, "Any of you kids do a machine gun?" And my father stood up and went, "Ah," like that.
Yeah.
And they said, "Come on up here, kids." So my father got the part. And
Oh my
then
gosh.
apparently they tried. Then the movie was made by William Wyler, a great director. It starred Humphrey Bogart, Sylvia Sidney,
Hmm.
uh, Joel McRae,
Oh yeah.
and who's Ann Sheridan, and who's the other great actress, and Claire Trevor. And it's a wonderful movie. And they couldn't find six kids in L.A. to play
Okay.
the part, so they basically had them come out and do the picture.
And
And
then
they were like a sensation. I mean, my father
yeah.
used to say we were like the Beatles. And when I was a kid and I would go back to New York and visit my family, they had saved all these movie magazines from the 30s. Well, I don't know what they've done with them now.
Yeah.
I was surprised. This was like 1960 or so. I was, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
I still remember just the shock at how many big stories there were in like Photoplay and these other movie magazines about the Dead End Kids. So they were like they were like the first real teen sensation in American popular culture.
That's so cool. That's so amazing. And then it's crazy how long ago that was now, and people forget that kind of thing. But that's really cool. And just the fact that, they became like he in particular became a comedy legend because he was kind of known as the funny one. And like you said, with Milton Berle, I mean, another comedy legend was babysitting him. And that I think that's another reason why I'm doing this is like you mentioned that at the lake this summer, and I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like I've been sitting on this for forever, and I'm just now hearing about like why wouldn't you lead with that? So I was like, you should walk in every door and say, hey, Milton Berle babysat my dad. That's it. You should walk in a room and say that. So yeah,
I'll do that from now on. I'm going to do that.
you
All
know,
right, Gary Hall. Milton Berle babysat my father.
yeah, all those, but you have 100 things that you could say as you walk in the door. I mean, but so that's fascinating to me that so then he moves the whole family, all 16 kids move out, or was Huntz on the younger end of the 16?
No, my dad came out here. It's actually kind of an interesting story in itself. My dad came out here, and he had this ne'er-do-well older brother who I loved, Richie.
Okay.
My middle name Richard is in honor of Richie, my uncle.
Okay.
And Richie is like a real dandy. I mean, you see these pictures of him in the 30s, he's wearing like spats and, a real great looking sport jacket and everything.
Uh-huh.
So they sent my uncle Richie out here as the chaperone for my father, which was like, it was not a smart decision.
Not an ideal
So
chaperone.
Richie came out with him. And the other thing they did was my family were very devout Roman Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
And they got him connected with all the Roman Catholic kind of stars in Hollywood. So Bing Crosby and his kids,
Wow.
Jack Haley and his kids, Loretta Young and her sisters,
Okay.
they were all basically made him go to church with them all on Sunday, right?
Yeah.
And and so but he was the only one. And then my father he was making a lot of money in 1935 in the Depression. He was making, something like $5,000 a week or something in 1935, which was like
That's tons now.
twice,
Yeah.
twice somebody's annual salary, right?
Right. Yeah.
And he sent all the money back to his mother.
Uh-huh.
And then when he got back, first time he went back, she said, well, let me take you over to St. Stephen's Church. And she takes him to the local parish church and shows him, here's the altar I bought with all the money you sent me.
Oh,
God, my father was mad. He was like,
yeah,
I didn't send you the money to buy an altar.
yeah, because they were struggling before that, right? I mean, it's not like they were living high on the hog, right? With 16 kids, and
yeah, they were
had to be tough.
Well, they were 16, but my father was at the tail end. Kathy Hall, who was your aunt, who was sitting next to me,
Yeah.
Once when we were in Utah, spent a couple days at the Mormon.
I told Joy about this. Yeah.
There's the Mormon center there where you can go trace your ancestors.
Oh, right. That's what you were talking about. That was the thing.
Kathy actually found the census records for my grandparents and named all the kids and gave their ages and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. That's So if he was towards the end of that's what I think, like with 16 kids, of course, I can't fathom that.
Only 8 of them lived to adulthood.
Oh, that's right. You said, yeah. So
and then,
because it's a different time.
Born and then some of them died as young adults.
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up, I knew like 5 or 6 of my aunts and uncles, but that's all I knew. But because they didn't all make it,
Yeah. That's it's a different time, and it's sad reality.
A lot of them had like burst appendix.
Really?
You think about before antibiotics, they die of peritonitis or burst appendix. Life was
because healthcare wasn't like what it is now. So did your grandparents ever end up eventually coming out to LA, or did he went back?
No, my grandfather died in 38.
Okay.
Dead End, the movie was made in 37.
Okay.
My grandfather Joseph died in 38. And then my grandmother, Mary Ellen, died on my birthday in 1952.
Oh, gosh.
Of course, when I first met all my cousins, they all were angry at me because their grandmother had died on my birthday.
Like it's your fault.
That's the sort of magical thinking in the Hall family,
Goodness.
You must have caused it because it was your birthday. But they got over it. Yeah,
were you born in LA?
Yes.
Out in LA.
Now this is a great show business story.
Yeah.
I was born on September 22nd, 1949. And right before I was born, the director Sam Wood died. And Sam Wood directed Day at the Races, Night at the Opera. He was a big director in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And then, so of course, my father always thought, the fact that I was born shortly after Sam Wood died, that sort of I had inherited some great show business karmic greatness, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that when my mother went into the hospital to go to labor, my dad was working on the set. They were making a movie, The Bowery Boys Meet the Monster, and he couldn't go. So Bobby Coogan, who was Jackie Coogan's younger brother, drove my mother to the hospital. My mother checks into the room, and the orderly comes in and says, Warren William died in this room. Warren William was a gigantic movie star in the early 30s, time.
Yeah.
And so I was born in the room Warren William died in on the day Sam Wood died. So I'm touching greatness all over the place.
Yeah, you really are you are a very important figure in the cosmic.
I'm where it all comes together. I'm like the nexus of these.
You're the nexus being. Maybe you're a nexus being, and
that's
you're
right.
connected.
It's the Matrix, right?
Well, it is the Matrix. Well, it's kind of funny because we, just to tell the listeners how we kind of started BSing about this idea of podcast, just all these stories you have, and then I just realized that you guys also are friends and connected to so many celebrities besides all these older ones when you were first born. But like, Mimi Kennedy is a good friend, and you guys, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman, went to your school, Aunt Catherine. So it's like
Yeah.
you're in LA, you've been in LA for a long time, and you guys, go through all these people, and you just drop this thing. Oh yeah, by the way, yeah, Dom DeLuise is my neighbor's uncle. Whatever that's that one I just made up, but. So we started just spouting out. I just
Actually,
started
I hired Don DeLuise's nephew to teach at Oakwood School. When I was,
Is that right?
Yeah, he was great. He was a choral director. He was great.
See, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here is that we started sitting around the campfire this summer and just kind of we would just throw out names, and most of them you'd have some connection to. A couple you'd be no connection to them that you know of yet. So that's why I thought that'd be a fun podcast where let's just throw out celebrities and see how many degrees from Gary Hall are they. And we could probably find,
Yeah, but I think there are celebrities of a certain era and also of a certain level of show business, right? I mean, I don't hang with Brad Pitt, right? I mean,
but I bet we could connect them via Dom DeLuise.
Well, we did do that movie with George Clooney at Christ Church. Remember when?
So that's true. Yeah. So that way, you guys did. Yeah, George Clooney did a movie, and so there's that picture of Aunt Kathy, you and my mom, and all those her friends with George Clooney, right? Throwing a football around. So that's a big name right there. So let's get. So that was really fascinating. But really quick before I jump back into the 40s. So I guess it's the 40s because you were born in 49. You named yourself, right? How I can't
say I did.
When you were born, though, you had a different name.
Okay, my birth name is Leslie Richard Hall.
Okay,
and nobody in my family has their actual name.
Okay,
so my father was Henry Richard Hall, but because they had a German neighbor. Who said, "Oh, a little Huntz," which means like a diminutive for dog.
Oh, really?
They called him Huntz. That's where Huntz comes.
That's from. Where Huntz came from.
That's his nickname. That was his nickname in the family from forever. And he couldn't. He was Henry Hall, but the Screen Actors Guild has a rule that two actors can't have the same name.
Right.
And if you ever look up Henry Hall on IMDb, he was an old man who played like bankers and things like that.
Yeah.
A very distinguished looking older man. So my father had to be Huntz. So he was Henry Hall actually on Broadway when he was a dead end because that was not a movie.
Yeah.
When he came out here, he had to be Huntz. So,
wow.
And my mother's name is Dolores Wright. She hated that name because Dolores really means sadness, like sorrow, pity, pain. And so when she changed her name to Leslie, and because she liked Leslie Howard, the actor.
Okay.
And that was her name, Leslie Wright, when she danced at Earl Carroll.
Yeah.
And then when I was born, my father was working and he wasn't around the hospital.
Yep.
So my mother named me Leslie because she liked the name.
Yeah.
And then when I was 3 and they got divorced, they always called me Butch. Nobody knew what to call me, so they always called me Butch.
They called you Butch when you were little?
Butch was my nickname when I was a kid. And so
you really look like a Butch.
I know. I'm Butcher, but I had a Butch haircut.
Butch
wax and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I started trying when my parents got divorced. And my father was always on the road because they only made these movies like 4 weeks a year. They made 4 pictures a year. So that was 2 months. The other 10 months, he and Gabe were in their nightclub act going around the country. And he was also a regular on the Milton Berle show and on the Red Buttons show in the early days of television. And so when they decided to get divorced, my dad moved out. My mother told me that he was just on tour, and I knew that was a lie, and I started having tantrums. And so my mother went to a child psychiatrist.
Yeah.
The child psychiatrist said, young boys have enough trouble with their mothers without sharing the same name. So you might want to give him a new name. And so when my dad came back, they got one of those, name the baby books.
Yeah.
And they read me a list of names. And when I got to Gary, I said, okay, that's me. I think I probably just wanted to stop and be done. So yeah,
I got to the G's. Yeah,
I chose that name, and it's a weird feeling.
Great parenting.
Yeah.
And then to get my father's residuals from the Screen Actors Guild, I had to go legally change my name to Gary at age 70.
Oh, really? So you were
Because
still Leslie officially until
I
then?
was still legally Leslie my entire life. And then I was like, okay, I've got to be Gary. So had to go to court and get my name changed like 5 years ago.
Oh
So
my goodness. That's hilarious. I don't think I was aware of that.
yeah, well,
Oh my
that's
gosh. That's so
late
funny.
breaking news.
Yeah. Late breaking. Yeah. This. Oh my gosh. So these are all great. So can we jump into the marijuana arrest?
Sure.
Or is this too controversial? Are we like we don't
No,
want
I
Huntz
mean,
Hall's career to get canceled?
my father was a lifelong proponent of marijuana use.
Yeah.
My father was also an alcoholic who got sober late in life.
Mhm.
And anyone who was ever near him would tell you they would rather be around him when he was smoking dope than when he was drinking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my father did smoke marijuana in the 30s and 40s. There was a period in the late 40s where they were trying to bust Hollywood celebrities, the most famous of which being Robert Mitchum.
Yeah.
And so my father, they came to my father's apartment in Hollywood, in the backyard, and he and Ben Melzer, who was his manager and lifelong friend,
Okay.
were digging up a can of marijuana that they had buried near a tree in the backyard of this apartment building.
So they would bury it. That was
Yeah,
the thing. I think you told me the story, and so just to keep it hidden, they would stash their weight. They would
yeah,
bury it behind a tree or
yeah,
under a
like
tree.
near a tree. But they were digging it up, and the cops showed up and they arrested him. And there was a trial, but my father was acquitted. He
Okay.
didn't deserve to be acquitted. I mean, he was guilty as hell, but
Yeah.
um, uh, he pled entrapment,
Okay.
and apparently it was convincing to the jury, so he was acquitted. But one of my feelings about my father's one of the reasons he's on the cover of Sergeant Pepper, I think,
Yeah.
is because he was really seen, especially in the '60s, by a lot of musicians as one of the kind of pioneers of marijuana smoking. And he was
Yeah.
a lifelong dope smoker, and I'm sure he is happy wherever he is, knowing that it's legal almost everywhere now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's completely pretty much decriminalized, and like you said, it's no worse than alcohol. And most people, you hear about people drunk driving all the time and killing people. You don't really hear about that with marijuana as much.
Right.
And maybe because people smoking weed don't really leave the couch, but but like you said, it's not. Yeah, that's really cool because you don't hear about anybody being an advocate for that other than the '70s, those '60s, I guess, and the '70s, and you don't hear it even talked about in the '40s. So that's really cool. And then that you said he pled entrapment, uh, which I mean, for them to come around the corner while he's digging it up, somebody must have known he had it there, probably, I would guess. And
Right, right.
but that's interesting to me. And
But
then
it's amazing that Mitchum was able to rebuild his career. Well, that happened to also, if you ever watched Perry Mason, William Tallman was
okay,
arrested for marijuana possession.
is that right?
That was in the '60s. Yeah, if you ever see a Perry Mason episode where they, like Perry's out of town, they're trying the case in Fresno, and there's a different DA, it's because William Tallman was being tried, and I think
Oh,
he
okay,
did at the time for marijuana possession. So it was they always wanted to go after famous people
yeah, to
uh,
keep it, yeah,
to get and it was one of those crusades, and it was one of those crusades that would, because it was also in the '50s especially, it was like it was jazz musicians, it was beatniks, it was the poets, it was all the people that were seen as antisocial or not conforming. And so part of the drive against marijuana was drive against nonconformist people that weren't just behaving like regular.
yeah. They want everybody just fall in line and
Right.
follow yeah, which is it's crazy how much of that reflects today. The same kind of stuff going on today. Still same thing. So then towards the end of the '40s and like beginning of the '50s is when the Bowery Boys came about, right? So
Right.
how did that transition? Like, what was the Bowery Boys as opposed to the other ones? Was it just a new
So
company or a new?
Yeah, I mean, Leo Gorcey, who was the head of the Bowery Boys, the main guy,
Uh-huh.
uh, and my father was a sidekick. Uh, Leo was a very, very good businessman,
Okay.
and Leo ended up. Leo had a ton of money when he died. He had a big ranch in Northern California, and Leo and my father realized there. So if you ever watched some of the East Side, they did, like Junior G Men. They did serials about the war, Junior G Men of the Air.
Yeah.
And then they did these, which were basically World War II, kids helping defeat the Nazis. And
Yeah.
then they did those movies with Bela Lugosi, Ghost on the Loose,
Yeah.
Troops Run Wild. That was actually uh, uh, Ava Gardner's first movie. She played my father's sister in
Oh, really? That was her
Ghost
first
on the
movie?
Loose. Yeah, it all takes place at her wedding.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a
Okay.
funny movie. But I think my dad and Leo realized that they were the main draw in that group,
Yeah.
that they as a team were the main draw. And so when
Yeah.
their contract was up for the East Side Kids with a producer named Sam Katzman, they signed with a guy named Jan Grippo, who produced the early Bowery Boys movies. And they own part of the pictures. So uh, it was really a business move more than anything else. It was
Okay.
they're going to have these pictures are going to be, starring Leo and Huntz, and Gabe Dell was in some, and Bobby Jordan was in a couple, and
Yeah.
Bernard Gorcey, Leo's younger brother. Leo's father, Bernard Gorcey, was in. He played Louis, the sweet shop guy, and then David, Leo's brother. It's kind of a Gorcey family enterprise. But Leo and my father both owned a percentage of the pictures.
Gotcha.
And those movies, they made 48 of those movies. Those movies were gigantic moneymakers for Monogram
Yeah.
and for Allied artists. They made them in 2 weeks a piece. They did 4 a year, and they were second feature B movies,
Yeah.
and they made money hand over fist.
Yeah.
And they only ended when uh, Leo's father died, and Leo just couldn't go on because he was grief stricken. And so they had my father, and then Stanley Clements joined the group, and they did 4 more movies with Leo and with my dad and Stanley, but it just didn't have the same.
It wasn't the same after his dad
It wouldn't
died.
have the same dynamic, and so they ended the series. But it was a gigantic success financially.
I didn't realize they made that many of them. So they
Yeah, my
lasted.
father's in almost like 200 movies. I mean,
Yeah, that's
they were
crazy.
making movies hand over fist. When he was at Warner Brothers, and they were not work when if there was a day where he wasn't working on a Dead End Kids movie, they'd put him as a copy boy in another movie.
Yeah.
So he's in just a couple hundred movies.
Just nonstop filming. And that's the cool thing is
Right.
now there's so much of that available on YouTube now because they're so much older and they, you used to have to wait for them to come on,
Right.
Turner Classic Movies and those things. But you can really watch a lot of them on there. So I've been kind of earmarking those to kind of watch, and I have this weird obsession with chronology, so I got to watch them all in order. But now I'm excited about getting back into those, and so that's what if you're good with this, I would love to try to come up with a plan to just periodically have a conversation with you and make this a longer lasting thing.
Sure.
If you're open to it. I mean,
Sure.
these stories alone just blew my mind. And I'm sure there's so many things we can do. I just got to get a little bit more organized and figure out where to go from here. But I really appreciate you taking this time with me to do this.
Sure.
And this is just the 40s part. And so I know there's a lot more that we can just,
I would tell you, and also,
yeah.
I would also suggest to your audience,
yeah,
that there's some Facebook groups. There's a group called the Bowery Boys Depreciation Society. There's the Huntz Hall Appreciation Group, and I think there's a Leo Gorcey Appreciation Group on Facebook, and where you can connect with other people that like the Bowery Boys movies. But also the administrators of the Huntz Hall one often put up a link, usually somewhere in Russia,
yeah.
to the full version of the movies.
Oh, really? Of everything that you can get,
you can get them. I mean, they're available on CD.
Yeah.
But from Warner Brothers. But if you go to Facebook and you do the Bowery Boys Depreciation Society, the Huntz Appreciation Group,
Yeah, I'm on some of
you
those.
can then just scroll through there, and a lot of what this woman, Keith Atkins and Wanda Gilbert, who are the two people that started these groups, they often just post the link to the Russian, so the Russian disinformation version of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm in some of those groups too, and I see a lot of that stuff, but I don't think I've seen that you can do that. I was gonna say, oh, also I wanted to ask you, are you in touch with or friendly with any of Leo's family? I just wondered if you
I'm
guys
friendly
kept.
with them. I mean, Brandy Gorsey's Zimmer, I just know through Facebook.
Yeah.
I haven't seen him in a year or so, but Gabe Dell Jr.
Uh-huh.
My father's lifelong closest friend was Gabe Dell. They
Gabe
were
Dell was.
together. They had a comedy act together. They were just like the Corsican brothers. They were just, they were really bonded with each other. And Gabe, when I was in college, Gabe got married and he had a son, Gabe Jr. And I used to babysit him when I was a college student. And
Okay.
he lives in North Hollywood. And I run into him every once in a while.
Okay.
I like him a lot. He's a clown, actually. He teaches clowning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
How appropriate.
He lives
Yeah.
in the house that Gabe had, and so, but a lot of them we were at something. And Bobby Jordan's niece Hollis was in high school with me.
Okay.
Her uncle owned a watch repair shop across the street from Warner Brothers, and when I was in junior high, I went in there, and he had a picture of the dead end kids behind the cash register, and I said, "Oh, my dad was one of the dead end kids," and he was like, "Yeah, kid. People always tell me they had relatives in the dead end kids. They usually mean the little rascals or whatever." He said,
Yeah.
"What's your father's name?" I said, "Huntz Hall." He said, "Oh, your father was in the dead end kids." Anyway, Hollis, his daughter, who's Bobby Jordan's niece, I still am in touch with because she was a year behind me in high school. But yeah, they're not. We saw that guy. We met. Remember, there was a woman named Colette Joel, who is from New Jersey, and for some reason, she is a lifelong freak about the Dead End Kids and Bowery Boys. She's actually the person that started the Dead End Kids Depreciation Society. And
yeah.
When I'd be out here in the summer, because I was living and working back east most of my working life, but I come out here in the summer, and she'd have these parties at her house in Northridge. And one year, Bobby Jordan's son was there, who I'd never met before. Leo Gorsey Jr. Wrote an autobiography. He had Leo was a big drinker, and Leo Jr. Ended up going into AA and writing an autobiography about his life in recovery.
Yep.
But I don't really know a lot of the other kids.
Well, that's kind of a good segue when you talk about the alcoholism for us to end on the World War II story, where the punchline, where you were sitting. This is where Brooklyn comes in. You were sitting at a restaurant in Brooklyn.
I was in high school, and I was in junior high.
Yeah.
And I was working at the New York World Fair in the summers. And one night we go out to this Italian restaurant in Brooklyn.
Okay.
With my dad and his wife, then Lee, who was his longtime wife.
Any idea what the restaurant was?
No.
Okay.
But it was in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And it was an Italian restaurant. And my friend Bob Allen, who was a teacher of mine, who got to know my dad, Bob, and we're all there at this restaurant. And my father, it was in his drinking days, and he was not a good drinker.
Yeah.
He would become shit-faced after about 2 drinks. And he got really ugly after about 3 drinks. And we're sitting at this table, and it turns out that Joey Gallo, the gangster,
yes,
is sitting at a table nearby and recognizes my father.
Joey Gallo has been portrayed in tons of mobster movies.
Well, and there's a Bob Dylan song about Joey, and Joey Gallo was murdered in a clam bar in New York not long after this interchange.
Yeah,
but Joey Gallo, and he was a bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a real he was a scary guy. He was
Real scary
they called him
mafia.
Crazy Joey.
Yeah,
And,
Crazy Joey Gallo.
he
Yeah.
was like unpredictably violent. So we're sitting there, and Joey Gallo is sitting over there, and he starts waving to my dad, and my dad doesn't respond or anything. And then he sends a bottle of wine over, and my father sends it back. And so finally, Joey Gallo comes over to the table, and he says, Huntz, I'm a big fan of yours, and he says, my father says, fuck you. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm dead.
You're all going to get
I've
killed.
been hearing stories about who this guy was, but
Yeah.
what's going on. And so then he says, Huntz, say something nice. And my father says, World War II. And then he says, Huntz, why aren't you being nice to me? I'm a very bad man. And my father says, the only thing bad about you is your breath. And then I'm like, okay, that's it. We're all going to be dead. But Gallo just starts laughing.
Oh,
And Huntz, you're great. Then he walks away. But really, Bob and I thought we were going to die.
yeah.
I mean,
We just yeah.
this is over. This was like, he was, I'm trying to say, like we think from The Sopranos or from The Godfather that these guys were like these wonderful, fun people. And some of them were. My dad had a lot of friends that were in the mob, and some of them were very funny and warm and great. But this Gallo guy was nuts. So
yeah, I think if you look him up, there are stories of him just snapping and going nuts and murdering people. So I can't remember what movie he's in. Like a buddy of mine's a big mafia buff, and I was telling this story, and he was like, "Oh my God, that guy's super famous, and that's really crazy." But you said you have no idea why he was pissy with him, like because he liked other mobsters, right? He generally liked mafia guys. Mafia guys liked him.
Yeah, he did. I mean, I never because literally a lot of his best friends were from mob families.
Yeah,
he had a very good friend, Sandy Sena, who was a recording engineer who had been in a big made mob family, who then left and became a recording engineer. But Sandy had a lot of friends who were, I told you this. I may have told you this story. I was a freshman in college, and I was having trouble in this class. I was about to get a bad grade.
Yeah.
Thomas A. Noble, this sort of patrician Yale professor, and I happened to mention that my dad says to Gugu, this friend of my dad's, Gugu, who was a button, which is like a local neighborhood guy.
Okay.
And he says, Gugu says, your dad tells me that you're having trouble with this professor up at Yale. I said, yeah, give me his name. I'm going to have him break his arms. It's like, Gugu, let's dial this back a little bit. I didn't want to have Thomas A. Noble have his arms broken just quite then.
Not quite yet, but
yeah, it was weird. But they were. I love those guys. They were funny, but I never encountered them in a bad setting. But the Joey Gallo thing, I was like 14, and that was scary.
You were only 14. I didn't realize that.
I was in ninth grade. Yeah, I was in ninth grade.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so that's a perfect way to end this. I had to get that story in because that's the kind of that story's so great, and that's what prompted me to sit down and record with you is that if you have that great story, there's got to be more. So well, it's been about an hour. Thank you, Uncle Gary and Aunt Kath, for being here. And if you're open to doing this some more, I'm gonna kind of laser focus on certain topics and see if we can get you on here again and talk more about Huntz and just all the celebrities you guys know.
I'm happy to. I'm happy to drop names at the drop of the head.
Yeah, if you're okay with doing this, I'm going to come up with a series of things I want to ask you about and focus on if you're good with it. So I had fun doing this. So.
Always happy to see you.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Love you guys.
Right.
Love you too.
Right. Bye, guys.
Oh, my child, it's about to get wild. Have you been down on the streets today? Say, yeah, now, baby, it's about to get crazy. crazy, everybody's got something to say. We got 10,000 people screaming, oh my God, it's over, but they're never gonna take us away. So you better get believing there's a brand new feeling. If you're asking, I say stay awake, stay awake. I know you feel it on the inside.
Matt Truman Ego Trip is the greatest band of all time. Buy their music. Also, American Timelines is a product of History for Jerks and a member of the Queen City Podcast Network. Find out more about History for Jerks at historyforjerks.com. Check out the Gruff and Loud Show on YouTube and the Nerd School podcast featuring the sexy art star. There's also a dumb t-shirt shop on Threadless, created by History for Jerks. You can buy a Gordon Jump shirt or an Edie McClurg shirt. It's really dumb and stupid.